The Taxation Budget Measures Bill is set down for second reading presently. I understand it is the wish of the Government to introduce the other two bills.
Social Security Long-Term Residential Care Budget Measures Amendment Bill, introduction. Customs and Excise Tobacco Products Budget Measures Amendment Bill, introduction.
The Social Security Long-Term Residential Care Budget Measures Amendment Bill and the Customs and Excise Tobacco Products Budget Measures Amendment Bill are set down for first reading presently. I call the Honourable Peter Dunn.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I move that the Taxation Budget Matters Bill be now read a second time. Mr Speaker, ours is a broadly based low-rate tax system that aims to raise revenue in the most efficient manner to support the Government's aspirations for the economy. We value fairness in the system to ensure that everyone pays their fair and proper share of tax. For this reason, this bill seeks to repeal two existing tax credits, replace another, and also remove the voluntary repayment bonus for student loan repayments, as well as introduce new changes to livestock regime rules. I won't go through each of these in detail, sir, because they were covered during the first reading debate, but let me just take some time to discuss some of the issues that have been raised. Mr Speaker, I want to talk first about the tax credit for income under $9,880. This was originally devised as a temporary means for compensating a small group of workers following the 1986 tax reforms, which I think Mr Mallard will recall. Maybe other members will have read about them in the history books. But the important point is that today, none of the original target audience of those reforms actually qualify for the credit, but it is still being claimed by other people for whom it was not intended. Mr Speaker, there's no clear policy rationale why people who currently claim that credit, such as those who work full-time for a small part of the year, should pay less tax than others with the same income, but who earn it in a different way, such as someone who works part-time for the whole year, who is not eligible for the credit as it stands. Mr Speaker, it's also not fair. Well, there's a long night ahead of us, I'm told. It's also... Sorry? Yeah, just be patient, Mr Cunliffe, it will come. It's also not fair that while the majority of farmers comply... A lot longer than that member has been and is likely to be. Mr Speaker, what I was saying is that while the majority of farmers comply with the letter and spirit of the existing tax law, some farmers have been exploiting some of the existing rules with regard to the herd and the livestock schemes, the herd and the standard value scheme, to their tax advantage. Now, in respect of those measures, we announced in last year's budget a consultation process for change. This budget gives effect to the outcome of that consultation, the decisions of which were announced in around March of this year. Mr Speaker, I want to say a little word or two about the student loan repayment bonus changes. The important point here is that that bonus was introduced as a way of encouraging people to make their repayments. But it's being abolished now because what we actually have discovered is A, that some of the other measures that have been put in place subsequently have been far more effective in terms of encouraging repayment, and B, as with the transitional tax measure I referred to earlier, the purpose is being distorted and we're getting people claiming the repayment bonus in the same year that they're making a repayment and actually benefiting from the system. That was not what was intended at all. So that is why that is being repealed. Mr Speaker, I want to talk now about paperboards, which Mr Mallard will be delighted about. It was interesting during the first reading debate how paperboys somehow seized the public imagination. At a somewhat frivolous but nonetheless relevant level, I should point out that since the demise of evening papers, we actually no longer have paperboys. Now, Mr Mallard is a wily character. He may well say, there's a squawking creature to my right which I will ignore. I come to Mr Mallard, who, I can't understand a word you're saying, I'm sorry. Mr Mallard may well say in response, what about... Exactly. And I should tell him that the community newspaper workers are actually, funnily enough, described as pamphlet droppers and were never covered by this regime anyway, and in fact their income will be under the $2,340 threshold that will still apply. What we are doing here, and I thought that the member would be interested in this, what we are putting in place here is the last nail in the coffin of Muldoonism. The existing child tax credit was introduced by Sir Robert Muldoon in 1978 as a temporary measure because at that time, probably at that time, this is a very look. You can have this argument all you like, but this is a. I think you're right, actually, Mr. Goldsmith. It was because that was the caravan and the boat tax at the same period. But the point I was making was that in 1978, this was put in place because at that point, most employers...
Order. My left and my right, you cannot interject on each other. The Speaker has the floor.
Thank you, Mr.
The Honourable
Speaker.
Peter Dunn.
In 1978, this is a riveting story, I know, but it needs to be placed on the record to put some context around this debate. Very few employers deducted tax at source, and a number of the people in the category being paper boys and girls and others of that ilk found themselves facing the potential of tax bills at the end of the year because the tax had not been properly deducted. So this temporary transitional measure was put in place. 33 years later, most of the paper boys and girls have long since ceased to be in that role, but more importantly, most employers now actually make deductions at source anyway. So the purpose for the concession, if you like, has become outdated. It's no longer necessary. The people who are affected, if they're earning above that $2,340 threshold, will be able to file for their tax returns in the normal way that they have been able to do for some time. So, and if they're earning under, we're not particularly interested in them. Frankly, the exemption will still remain. So the point, yes, it does. Well, I drafted it. I should know what it says, Mr. Mallard. I appreciate that's not. I appreciate that that's not something.
He should read his own press statement.
Well, it's rather difficult to make that claim when you actually write your own press statements. But anyway, the point is that this is not a significant measure. It is removing something that has become completely outdated. And, Mr. Speaker, frankly, a lot of the heat that's been generated about this has been good fun in the context of the debate. But when members opposite complained earlier about Parliament spending, I think, a couple of $1 million passing this allegedly unnecessary legislation, it's a pretty expensive price to pay for a little bit of fun. Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House and move its second reading.
The question is that the motion be agreed to.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Grant